have the opportunity to be here with Brian and Kim Gregory, and they are our mission partners in a South Asian country. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about who they are. Go ahead, Kim.
We are Kim and Brian, and we have 4 children. Our 3 oldest are all married now and are having babies, so we have 3 grandbabies. And our youngest, Christopher, just turned 6.
So we've been serving in a Muslim-majority South Asian country, and we've been there for 24 and a half years.
Okay.
Since we first landed as career global workers, and it's been filled with lots of adventures, lots of opportunities to see God at work.
One of my main ministries is working at William Carey Academy, which is an English medium school for the local children. We are a K through 12 school, and we have about 360, 370 students in attendance each year, and I teach in mainly the high school in science and health and some cooking electives.
Right.
One of my other big responsibilities that developed over the last few years is working with our language program in training our global workers how to speak the local language. Some are coming to the office and some are learning online. So even during the lockdowns, we were able to continue to learn the local language.
Brian, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, my visa title is theological educator, and so I have the privilege in this majority Muslim country to be training pastors, evangelists, church planters, and leaders. And so I coordinate a Bible college ministry that has 4 different branches. And in addition to that, I have a role of shepherding our team of global workers.
Now, you guys are headed back in April, correct?
Lord willing, yes.
Yeah. So when you get back there, like, what goals do you have, and where do you see, picking back up where you left off and getting moving again?
I hope and pray that my main job is training the new international workers who will be taking a leadership role for the next generation. I see that as the most important thing that we're doing. On the other hand, some of the house church pastors of the majority background, they have 25 house churches, and they have struggled and endured persecution and have withstood and come through stronger. The people that used to beat them are now disciples of Christ. And my desire is to see at least 2 of these 25 gain recognized church status within their culture.
So there are obvious struggles to get the work done that needs to be done. There's some persecution, so to speak. But that's kind of expected as a follower of Christ. But what are some wins that you guys have seen over the years that keep you motivated, keep you wanting to keep going back and keeping on plugging away and doing this?
The big win is that the majority of the teaching is now being done by local nationals who've grown up in the program. We taught 49 college courses, and you can be thinking 3-credit college courses the way you would get them at Davis College or any university here. That level of academic rigor.
Okay.
126 students in this Muslim majority country training to be leaders of churches.
Wow.
And 35 graduating from one of our certificate programs. And so the real praise is my earliest students are now the professors.
Yeah.
And that brings great joy to my heart.
I mentioned that we have 3 older children who are all married. Our second son, Timothy, and his wife are planning to join us as missionaries or global workers.
Great.
And so we're thrilled. They were able to come out and visit and see where they will be working alongside with his dad in the Bible college. And Lord willing, they'll be joining us but towards the end of this year.
Another win is not only our own son and daughter-in-law, but there are 2 other young family couples that are responding, that have already joined the organization. One is in process of signing up. He's a pastor in Southwest Texas.
Okay.
And he wants his church to send him. It'll take a little longer to prepare them, but it'll be a wonderful model for the local people in our country, learning that they, even as poor and small as they may feel, God can send them to other nations.
Yes.
The work of God and his people is awesome.
Yep.
the different backgrounds his people come from to trust him and become disciples of Jesus, their persistence through suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it inspires me.
Well, we'll certainly be praying for you guys and for those things specifically. We'll have some of this information up on our website, ways that you can reach out and contact the Gregorys and keep them in prayer. But before I let you guys go, would you mind if I pray for you right now?
Thank you so much.
All right, let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the Gregorys, and I can tell that they just have this unfettered passion to serve you. And it's so great to hear about these ways that you have been working where they serve and changing lives, and it's exciting to see about these young couples that are coming to join them. I just ask you would pave the way, remove all the roadblocks that could be in their way so that they can get there safely and as quickly as possible, so that they can partner alongside Brian and Kim and carry on the ministry and just carry that torch to the next generation. Just ask that these house churches would receive that recognition that they are looking for, and that you would continue to have them grow and to prosper and to have an impact there in South Asia. Thank you for being a great God. I just ask you would keep the Gregorys safe health-wise. Just keep them safe as they fly over here in another month or two, and just allow them to get back to work, and just keep them free from sickness. In your name, amen. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it.
Good morning, church family. Is everyone wide awake? Is everyone realizing that spring is less than 2 weeks away? Less than 2 weeks away? We're going to make it, right? March came in like a lion, but it's going out like in a few weeks, right? We can say that and at least pretend that we believe it. We are in a series on the names of God, and we're studying more about God. And our prayer for you, my prayer for you, the more we learn about God, the more that changes our perspective on life and on us. There's something about focusing on God that can do that. And so I hope that's what happens today. Let me begin with a little story. Let's have story time with Justin, okay? This is a true story. It's a personal story, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the phone call, and I'll give you a little backstory of how it happened. So I was sitting at my desk in my church office in Kirkwood, New York, not too far south from here, and I was a 26-year-old seminary student who knew nothing. I still don't. I was a full-time student. I was also working at the produce department of Wegmans. Go Wegmans. I got to stock fruit and vegetables. I love fruit, hate vegetables, but other people bought it and I didn't have to eat it. I was also working as a part-time associate pastor at this church in Kirkwood. And my wife, Annie, was working as a photographer. And we were just barely making ends meet as I was finishing up seminary. And we were grateful. We were grateful for jobs to pay the bills, to keep the lights on, and keep food on the table. And that year, we would welcome our first child, which changes everything. But I was pulled my mind out of my studies, and Annie was on the other end. And she wanted to let me know that her boss had just talked to her and told her that the company was experiencing some financial challenges and that her job would be eliminated that week. I remember hanging up the phone because I remember exactly how I felt. I vividly remember the feeling of sweat just pouring down my body. I remember thinking, how are we going to make it? How am I going to finish school? How are we going to pay our bills? How are we going to survive? My mind was filled with fear. My heart was racing with questions that I couldn't answer. And I doubt I'm the only person here who's ever had their world flipped upside down. Would that be safe to say? Maybe it was a phone call, or maybe it was a pink slip, or maybe it was an accident or a diagnosis. I mean, for all of us, it's a different memory, a different moment. But in that moment when your life got flipped upside down, you kind of realized, I'm not in control here. And without some sort of intervention, I'm not going to make it. I need some help. So in those moments of crisis, and maybe you're in one right now, how are we to respond? Today we're going to look at a pretty powerful crisis story. And as we read the story, I think it will inform us for how we respond in crisis. So if you would turn in your copy of the Bible to Genesis 22. We're going to learn another name for God today, but it's in the context of a crisis story. And so this might be a name of God that you pull out and utilize in your next crisis. As you're turning there, let me take a moment and just welcome our other campuses. We got Cincinnatus and Bainbridge and online campus. Welcome to everyone that joins us. We're a church that's in many locations, but we exist for one purpose, to make more and better Jesus followers. Amen? Amen. Genesis 22. Here we go. Before I jump in, I'll give you a little bit of this backstory because we're jumping into the story kind of late. So years before this story, there was a young man who had heard God's call. And God's call went something like this. I want you to leave your home, your country, your people. I want you to go to a place where I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the sea shore. So fast forward a number of years, and this man and his wife were now elderly, and they had no children between the two of them together. They had no permanent home, and they were pretty sure that God had forgotten his promise quite a while ago. So you can imagine how shocked they were when he was 100 years old, she was 99, and she got pregnant. And then she gave birth to a son, and they appropriately named their son Isaac, which means he laughed, because they were laughing at their life. Can you imagine her joining the local MOPS program? 99-year-old new mommy. So fast forward a few more years, and the son, this new only son of these very elderly parents, is now walking and talking and growing. And God's about to put his daddy, this little boy's daddy, through the biggest test of his life. Look at verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. Now notice, before we go any further, what's God doing to Abraham? The thing that we loved when we were in school, right? Tests. We all love tests. God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son. Now listen, this is kind of interesting. God and Abraham were on speaking terms with each other. Wouldn't you love this kind of relationship? Maybe not when you hear what God said to him. Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. On a mountain I will show you. Okay, now who wishes God was speaking directly to them? Now, I can imagine if I was Abraham, my conversation back with God would probably be something like this. God, you know I'm over 100 now, and my hearing's not the best. What it sounded like you told me to do was to go on a hike and kill my son. Pretty sure that's not what you said. Come again? Like, what is it that you actually want me to do? But Abraham's response is not that at all. Look at his response, verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Now notice this wasn't just a little trip to the park. It was a 3-day hike. And Abe goes on this hike and he gets to the place and he kind of tells his servants, no further. The boy and I have to go on a little walk alone. But notice what he says is going to happen after they worship. What he specifically say is going to happen? He says, then who's going to come back to you? We. Now, why do you think he said we? Now, some of you are like, well, he said we because if he said I will come back, some of them might have called 911. He said, I don't know what this dad's going to do to his kid. It's possible, but what it seems like this is a statement of faith. It seems like Abraham is absolutely convinced that whatever happens in the next few hours, somehow him and his boy are going to come back. And he just seems so convinced of this. And when he says, we will be back, the more I read that and studied that and contemplated on it, it almost gives me a little bit of chills. Thinking, how do you have that kind of faith? I, for one, do not have the gift of faith. I don't naturally and instinctively trust God in crisis. I don't. Anyone else? Okay, you all have the gift of faith. Good to hear. But I don't. It's not instinctive or natural or part of my gifting. We have on our elder team a man who has the gift of faith, and I love to be in the same room with him in crisis because he's calm and he's confident. And I always look at that and think, okay, I want to get close to him and I want that to rub off on me. Right? And Abraham is he's calm and he's confident. He's going on this walk with his boy. It's making no sense to him. His mind's probably swirling. His heart's probably racing. His legs probably wanted to go the other direction, but he goes on this walk with his boy. Verse 6. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and he placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son. The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? So Isaac's old enough to know that there's something missing, right? He's probably gone on worship trips with his dad before. He's gone on these hikes before, and they always bring wood and fire, and they always bring something to kill for a sacrifice. And he notices something's missing here. And he looks up at his dad. It wouldn't surprise me if his eyes are kind of anxious, kind of curious, like, Daddy, where's the lamb? Where's the sacrifice? And his dad just calmly replies this. Verse 8, Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. God himself, right? Nothing about this trip makes sense. Nothing about what God asked Abraham to do to his son makes sense. And yet Abe is just still convinced that somehow God's going to provide. Somehow God's going to provide. Pretty sure I wouldn't have had that same confidence. Verse 9. When they reached the place where God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. He's not just going through the motions, my friends. Every indication is that he's on the upswing, about to go on the downswing. He's going to follow through with this thing. It's a little horrifying and unsettling. Agreed? As a dad of two young boys, I'm sickened even imagining what he's about to do. And I don't quite even understand it, because one of the reasons God was disgusted with the other nations of the day is because they were offering their kids as sacrifices to their gods. God hated child sacrifice. So how could God, who hates child sacrifice, ask Abraham to do this to his son? Especially considering that God had promised to make him a great nation, and their only hope for becoming a great nation is this boy. Nothing makes sense. So it makes me wonder, well, then why isn't Abe at least hesitating? Why isn't at least he stopping and saying, this isn't right, there's something off here? Why would God ask me to do something that I wouldn't expect God to ever do? Ask me to do something I don't want to do? Ask me to do something that's going to break his promise to me? None of this makes sense. But what had Abraham told his son just shortly before this? He said, God will provide. Guess who knew better? Guess who knew God better than any other person on the face of the earth at this time? This guy right here. Right? This guy who had heard God's voice as a young man. This guy who had lived out of tents the rest of his life and every day relied on God's provision to survive. He knew God well. And the more he knew God, the more he just trusted that God is my provider. I'm just going to trust that God is my provider. When life doesn't make sense, when I'm living out of a tent and I should be in a land all my own, when I should have tons of descendants and my wife's barren and 99, when nothing makes sense, I have a God who's a provider. I'm just going to trust that. I'm just going to trust that. And he had the amount of trust to think, if God can bring life into the barren womb of my 99-year-old wife, then God can certainly bring back life to my dead son on this altar today. He's so convinced of this, he raises his knife. He's just about to do the unthinkable. Verse 11 happens. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham! Right at the last possible moment, knife in the air, son bound on the altar. Abraham, Abraham, here I am. He replied. I can only imagine the here I am was like a, whew. Oh, here I am. Says the most faith-filled, obedient man on the face of the earth, no contest. Here I am. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. This voice from heaven who stops him at the last possible moment says, hey, Abe, you passed. You passed the test. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. What had Abraham promised his son just a few minutes before? Son, God will provide. And I can almost imagine Abraham kind of untying the ropes on his son's body, putting the ram right together. They lift this ram on the altar. They step back, and arm in arm, they watch as the ram burns. I can only imagine this feeling of relief, probably the tears in their eyes as they watch the ram burning. I can only imagine them smiling at each other like, look what God did. I knew he'd come through. I knew he was going to show up today. Didn't know how, didn't know when, but I knew he was going to show up today, son. How big of a lesson do you think Isaac learned that day? Right? Don't ever go on a hike alone with Dad again. Right? Later, the author of Hebrews wrote this. Hebrews 11. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. Abraham had never seen anyone come back from the dead. He had never heard of someone coming back from the dead. No one had ever come back from the dead. And yet he knew who God was. And so he just thought God can do it. Here's what happens next, verse 14. So Abraham called that place Jehovah Jireh. In your English Bible, it probably says something different. It says, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. This is the name that Abraham put on that mountain that day. Jehovah, or Yahweh, the great I am, Jireh, the provider God, or the one who sees and takes care of needs. And when Moses wrote this, he said, and to this day, we know this mountain as Jehovah Jireh Mountain, the provider God mountain. Look at verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. Because, read that with me, because you have obeyed me. Because you passed the test. I can only imagine father, son walking home together that day. And I can only imagine them laughing about the story that they had to share with mom. How much are they going to tell her? Right? Mom's never going to believe what you almost did to me, Dad. She's going to be amazed, though, son, to hear how God provided. There's something that we can learn from this new name of God that Abraham introduces to us today. We have a God, we serve a God who loves to provide for his kids. But there's a little caveat. He usually waits till the last possible moment. He waits till the knife's in the air. He waits till you're in the crisis. Some of us are planners. We don't like crisis. We like to know stuff in advance. And the challenge is we have a God who likes to not tell us in advance, who wants to test us instead. And so what we view as a crisis, God sees as a test. It's a test of faith. It's a test of trust. Will we trust him when life doesn't makes sense? Will we obey him when what he's asking us to do makes no challenge this morning? You can't look around the room today or look around where the room you're in. You can't look around and see who has the greatest faith. You can't. There's no indicator light. Wouldn't that be kind of funny? There's an indicator light that showed a meter. There's no way to tell who in the room has the greatest faith. The way it works is in a moment of crisis, when the sweat is dripping down your arms, that's when your faith gets revealed. Only then is where you find out how much faith you have. A couple years ago, researchers were telling us that the younger generation, Gen Z, our kids, are the most anxiety-ridden generation in United States history. How do you think the last 12 months has been for them? And my heart breaks for the younger generation because they're living in such isolation and anxiety and fear. And my concern is that as adults, we're not building their faith. We have more young people coming back every Sunday and more youth coming back every Wednesday. And I have pretty bad news. We have fewer adults serving them and volunteering than we have ever had before. More and more of us have stepped back for different reasons. But our family ministry director recently shared with me that our kids' ministry, it may need to be cut back this summer or even stopped. And this fall, our Wednesday night youth ministry may have to be just completely shut down for lack of help. And my heart breaks, not because the doors close, but because we may be failing our test. That because in this crisis, when there's young Isaacs watching how we handle crisis, they could be learning the wrong lessons from us. You know, my grandparents lived through the Great Depression. They were children of the Great Depression, and it changed them. It changed them for life. My dad's dad, he died wealthy, and he was still buying generic toothpaste to save a few cents. My mom's mom, up till when she died, she was still hoarding rubber bands and plastic bags. Some of you know what I'm talking about. They were permanently marked by the trauma of the Great Depression. And our kids may be permanently marked by the trauma of the last year. They are longing for connection. They are longing for relationship. They are longing to have their faith built. And yet, where are their role models? And I believe God is giving us a test. I believe, and my friends, it's not just Berean, it's all across the country. Churches are reporting the exact same thing. Kids are starving for relationship. They're starving for someone to build their faith. And the volunteers are gone. And we are on the verge of failing our test. This past week, I heard a school superintendent talk about the coming mental health crisis. And I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right. When faith fades, fear grows, and fear is crippling. I said a few months ago, and I'll just say it again, I don't think this fear that I keep talking about and that we experience, it's not just about health fear, right? It's about fear of loss of freedom and political influence and loss of values and morals in America. But here's the bottom line. Whatever fear you're facing, whatever crisis you're experiencing, fear cannot solve it, right? Fear can't safeguard your freedoms. Fear can't preserve your country. Fear cannot keep you and your family safe. Only God can do that. And so today, amid a national crisis, I just want to ask you, where is your faith? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in Abraham's God? Do you believe in Jehovah Jireh? If so, prove it. Prove it. Prove it to your kids. Prove it to your grandkids. Prove it to your church family. Prove it to yourself. Here are some very specific ways this morning that you can prove it. One way is that we're partnering with Compassion International to help some kids who live in poverty and are crying out to Jehovah Jireh to provide for them. You and your family today can select a child to sponsor, and you can make that your act of faith, your act of obedience. And I know some of you say, well, Justin, you don't know how tight our finances are right now. All the more reason to take a step of financial faith. All the more reason to be like Abraham. And in crisis, prove your obedience and cooperate with Jehovah Jireh to meet somebody else's needs. Another way you can do that is we partner with Life Choices Center to provide for the needs of young couples who are facing unplanned pregnancies. Without our intervention and support, some young moms will choose to abort the life that's growing inside of them. So those of you who have been here, you know how it works. You can take a baby bottle home today. Don't fill it with milk. Fill it with change, money, bring it back. And we'll bless some young parents who are considering if they should abort their baby. And then another way, just another specific way to prove your faith is what I mentioned a few minutes ago. Maybe it's time to step up and serve. Maybe it's time to just say, look, everyone else is stepping out. Everyone else is stepping back. And I don't know their reasons, but I want to be part of the solution. I realize how isolated and anxious the next generation is, and I can be a role model for them. I can step up. And maybe you're thinking, I don't have the experience, I don't have the education, I can't serve as a teacher. Listen, that's okay. That's okay. Some of our family ministry teams, they're just looking for people who love young people to be an adult presence and hang out with them for an hour or two a week. You know, on Wednesday, this is a youth ministry going on in this room on Wednesday night. And here they were in the worship center because they came to celebrate their friend Tasha who got baptized. And the hunger in the room was so real. And I got to tell you, I have hesitated so much to talk about this today and so much to bring this up today because we're not the kind of church that makes public appeals for volunteers. You know we don't. Some churches, if you walk in and you have a pulse, you're roped in immediately to something. We don't want to do that. We want to be a church where people can grow and learn and hear the message. But we also are called to be a hospital where the sick and the hurting are cared for. And my friends, we're out of EMTs. We're sending out ambulances with nobody to drive them and nobody to bring anybody back. And kind of the shocking part of this for me is Sunday morning, my kids are learning about faith right now. Some of your kids are too. And you know who it is teaching them about faith at a level they can understand? There's a handful of adults. But Wednesday, our family ministry director recognized the ones who are keeping our family ministries program going. It's middle and high schoolers. Middle and high schoolers. And I looked at them and I admired them. And I'm thinking, look at these young Isaacs. Where are the Abrahams? Now, I don't mean you come on Wednesday with a knife. But I believe this is a test for us as a faith family, and I believe we're on the verge of failing it. And I think the consequences could last a generation. And maybe God just wants to use you to meet the needs of someone else. Maybe God has met your needs. He's Jehovah Jireh for you, and he wants to use you to meet the needs of someone else. I want to finish the story that we started today, the one with Abraham and Isaac. Does anyone know this mountain, the Mount Moriah, the mount that's called Jehovah Jireh, the mount that Moses knew about when he recorded this? Does anyone know where this is today? When I began researching this spot, I was absolutely stunned to discover that this mount today is right here. Temple Mount, Jerusalem. Does anyone get the significance? 1,000 years after Abraham, Isaac, there with the altar, 1,000 years later, Solomon built the first temple of God. Now it was destroyed later by the Babylonians. It was rebuilt, and the rebuilt temple stood in this spot on Mount Moriah until the time of Jesus. And so every week, what would happen at this temple is people would bring a ram or a lamb, and they would offer it to God. And God, instead of killing for sins, God instead would provide forgiveness and mercy to his people. On Jehovah Jireh, the Mount of God, this is the location of the Abraham and Isaac incident. This is the place where the temple got built. And over and over and over every day for hundreds of years, this was the place where Jehovah Jireh showed up and God provided. And one day, God's only son, Jesus, was sacrificed on a wooden altar not far from here. And God didn't back off at the last minute. He went through with it. And the moment Jesus died, you know what happened on Jehovah Jireh? Just a few miles away from where Jesus was sacrificed. There was this massive curtain in the temple separating God from people, God from the priests, and the temple curtain was ripped in two from top to bottom. And Jehovah Jireh provided direct access to him, to any person by faith. God provided. And if you visit the site today, which some of us have, what you'll find there is not a temple, you'll find a Muslim mosque. The Jews do not own this plot of land anymore. In fact, out of this massive temple complex, there is only one thing that the Jews own today. And it is this wall, the western wall. You can see the mosque here. They own the western wall. And it was an amazing sight, amazing privilege to go to that wall and realize we're at Mount Moriah. We're at Jehovah Jireh. And what happens at this wall every day is that faithful, devout Jewish people will come and they will weep and wail and write prayers and slick them in the cracks of the massive stones of that wall. And this wall is not called the Western Wall to the Jews. You know what they call it? The Wailing Wall. And they are praying that God allows them to have their land back, their mountain back, so that they can reset the temple and offer sacrifices again. And God's saying, no. No. I have given my sacrifice once for all. Sacrifices are done. Jesus paid it all. I am Jehovah Jireh. I am the God who provided. And one day, not far from here, on another hill, the Son of God has promised to come back. And he will on that day take the crown. And he will give us, provide for us a new kingdom. And he will be our new king. And we will get to live with Jehovah Jireh for the rest of eternity. I still remember sitting in my office that day, hanging up the phone, 2009. Sweat pouring down my shirt. And the sweat didn't lie. The sweat told the truth. I was scared out of my mind. I remember bowing my head and asking God for help to make a way, to provide, to do what I couldn't do, and to give me the faith to believe that he would. But I didn't know that he would, and I didn't know how it was going to happen. A few weeks later, February 18th at 12:19 p.m. to be exact, I got an email from some guy named Chuck Rapard or something like that, from a church somewhere called Green, some place way up north. And he said that they were searching for a pastor. He had seen my name on a graduate list, and he wondered if I'd send him a resume. And a few months later, a church named Berean voted to call us here. And that summer, we moved into our new home. That fall, we had our new child, Daisy May. And I look back on 2009, and it was the year that God taught us to trust him fully. It wasn't my first lesson. You know what? It's not my last either. This year, 2021, we went through another tight time as a church family. Our construction loan, the closing was delayed. It was supposed to happen in December. Our church voted on it. It was supposed to happen, but it didn't. And it couldn't for all kinds of red tape reasons. So we had agreed with the bank that we would self-fund the first $300,000, and then after that, the mortgage would kick in and pay the rest. But December came and went, and we continued to pay, and there was no mortgage closing. And so we self-funded out of our reserve. December came and went, January came and went, and now we're into February. And by then we had self-funded not $300,000, but almost $600,000. And one day, last month, I'm sitting in my office and the phone rings. And it's Alana, our amazing financial bookkeeper, and she called to tell me that we were almost out of money. How were we going to cover our payroll and our bills for the next 2 weeks? And I remember hanging up the phone. My heart and my mind are racing, but I noticed something. There was no sweat pouring down my shirt. Now, maybe it's just because I have better antiperspirant now. Or maybe it's because I know Jehovah Jireh a little bit better than I did in 2009. And instead of that sweat, I felt a sense of anticipation. And I remember thinking, God, I wonder how you're going to show up this time. God, I know you've provided in the past for me. I know you've provided in the past for your church. How are you going to show up this time? And instead of getting caught in my fears, I prayed and I waited. And my friends, a couple weeks ago, Jehovah Jireh showed up. And he provided the funds to finish construction in Bainbridge. And he provided the funds to continue to make more and better Jesus followers. And when I think of how God came through for our church last month, when I think of how God came through for me and my family in 2009, when I think of God coming through for Abraham thousands of years ago, I smile a little bit. And I remember that Abraham's God is my God. Abraham's God is your God. He is our Jehovah Jireh, and he will provide. Do you believe it? Then prove it with your obedience. Would you bow with me in prayer? In just a moment, we're going to end our morning by enjoying a symbol of God's provision. We call it the Lord's Supper. When you came through the doors, you might have picked up a cup with the elements right in that cup. And if not, we're going to play a song in a moment. You can slip out, you can grab a cup and come back to your seat. But here's what I'd like you to do in the quietness of the next few moments. We're going to play a song about communion. I want you to listen to the song, but more than that, I want you to just have a time of prayer to God, a prayer of gratitude to him. If God has provided for you, thank him for providing. Thank him for providing his son to be the sacrifice for your sin, to be the lamb on the altar when it should have been you. And then after the song's done, we will get to enjoy taking this together as a reminder that we serve Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides.
God provides. Thanks for that challenge to prove our faith by our actions, Justin. Now, if you'd like any information about how you can get involved with the Life Choices Center or Compassion Sunday, please visit bbctransform.org/news. And if you have any other questions, comments, or prayer requests, you can let us know about them at bbctransform.org/connect. And one of our staff will be in touch later this week. Now, right now, I want to take a few minutes to join all of our campuses in taking communion together as a church. And I'll be honest, as I've been thinking through this week about how to present communion online, I've had a hard time. I mean, the word communion means being together, and being together can be hard right now. Paul wrote to the Christians in Corinth 2,000 years ago about doing communion the right way. Now, back in May of 2020, we covered 1 Corinthians 11 and Paul's corrections to what was going on there. And I'd really encourage you to go back and watch it if you missed it the first time. You can find it as part of our Worship Wars series at bbctransform.org/watch from May 24th. Now, ultimately, what does all of that mean for us this morning? Sitting here with my bread and my juice, alone in my kitchen. Well, here's what I learned reading through Luke's account of the First Communion. In chapter 22, Jesus was finally sitting at the table with his disciples, the men that he'd been spent the last 3 years with. He had done this hundreds of times before, but this meal was special for 2 reasons. First, it was Passover, a time where the Jewish nation took time to remember God's provision and his rescue from the Egyptians. And second, this was the last time that he would eat with them before he would be arrested and killed. Now, I'd never noticed verse 15 in chapter 22 of Luke before. Jesus told his friends that he had been eagerly waiting for this meal. And that word eagerly kind of jumped out at me this week. Jesus, who was there at the creation of the world, was eager to sit and eat with his followers. I don't think that's changed since then either. Jesus is still eager to be with us. He is eager to be with me. That's an amazing thought. I think that's really the heart of communion. Somehow, for some reason, the God of the universe wants to be in communion with me. So he set up this tradition of communion. So as we take the bread and we break it, we remember the body of Jesus, beaten and broken, nailed to a cross for crimes he didn't commit. And as we eat it together, we do this as a testament to his death for us. Take the juice to symbolize Jesus' blood that was poured out for us. We can remember that it was because of his blood that we have the opportunity to be forgiven if we trust him. And we take time to remember who he is and what he did. But we can also be encouraged because he is still with us. He went through all the pain and suffering so that we can commune with him today. Would you drink with me? We can stand in the presence of God because of what he did. And that's just what God has always wanted, to be with us, to talk with us, to be our provider and our sustainer. So no matter who you are or where you came from, God loves you more than you can imagine. As this last song plays today, I want to invite you to spend some time thanking God for who he is. Confess to him anything that is stopping you from the communion that he wants, and praise him for his constant provision, even through hard times. I'll see you next week.